Trainees are among the most popular types of units in Fire Emblem, and also one of the most debated historically. Whether you think they're good, bad, or in between though, Trainees are a type of unit that a lot of people like using, including me. For that reason, it's interesting to think about what makes different Trainees tick and how different Trainee designs have created different player experiences and responses. With that in mind, let's take a look at a few different Trainees and see the different approaches that IS has taken to designing these units. I won't be looking at every Trainee in this series, just 3: Ross, Donnel, and Jawn. Each of these 3 units takes a different approach to Trainee design, and I think 2 of them work really well in the context of their games, and 1 of them I have some issues with. I'll clarify how I'm defining Trainee to start with. It's a little bit arbitrary, but to me a Trainee is a unit that exhibits many, but not necessarily all, of the following traits. Arrives at a lower level than the rest of your party, higher growths or more levels to gain, a special Trainee class, more flexibility than other units, and they're often a young character, or at least a character characterized as having a lot of potential. Again, this is a little arbitrary, but these are the reasons why I consider someone like Donnel a Trainee, but not someone like Nino. And these contribute to the things that I think make Trainees fun, which for me are as follows. Leveling up and gaining a lot of stats is fun, it's fun to raise a unit from scrub to god, extra customization options add an extra element of player choice, and unique classes for Trainees are usually cute and characterize the Trainee well and allow for an aesthetic narrative. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's talk about some Trainees. And what better place to start with than the game that defined the archetype for me, Fire Emblem: The Sacred Stones. Unlike most FE games with Trainees, Sacred Stones doesn't just give you 1, it gives you 3. Each one is in a different class, but they all share a few traits. They start in a special class that promotes into a typical base class, and can then promote again into a promoted class. And their EXP gain is very high while they're in their special Trainee class. So compared to other units in FE8, Trainees get a potential extra 10 levels of stats that they gain pretty quickly, and they also get an extra set of promotion bonuses to make up for their very low bases. Plus, each time they promote, they get to choose between 2 different classes, allowing for 3 to 4 final classes for them compared to the 2 final classes that most units get to choose between. For example, a unit that starts in Fighter like Garcia can choose between the Hero and Warrior class when he promotes, but a Journeyman, like our boy Ross, gets to choose to promote to Fighter or Pirate as his Tier 1 class, meaning that his final class options include Berserker, Hero, and Warrior depending on which base class you chose. So there's some extra customization here that you don't get with other units, and that's part of the fun of the Trainees. While this game does have 3 Trainees, I'm going to focus on Ross for 2 main reasons. 1, he's the first Trainee I ever used, so he's got a special place in my heart. And 2, he's a unit that I think does a lot of things right design-wise, even compared to the other Trainees in his game. He joins early, you pick him up in Chapter 2, and in a way that really cleanly demonstrates to the player what the deal with Trainees is. He comes with his father, and while his father is strong enough to fight multiple enemies on the right side of the map on his own, Ross is not. You need to rescue him with your flyer Vanessa. But Ross is quick to tell us that he doesn't just want to be protected and run away, he wants to fight and become a great warrior like his father. So the premise of the unit is quickly established. He's weak now, but with big dreams and potential, and one day he might even surpass his father. What's cool about him joining alongside Garcia is that even though they have a lot of similar traits, they give the player an interesting choice. Do you want to use the unit that's pretty alright now, but will never be more than pretty alright? Or do you want to use the younger, untested unit that could grow into anything? For me, the more fun answer is to use Ross, but I think even if you choose Garcia, it's fun that the game offers you this choice. Of course, using both is also an option, and that tells a good story too. You get to literally watch Ross grow faster than his father, going from underperforming him to matching his performance to eventually surpassing him. Ross joining alongside his father does a lot for his narrative as a unit. But let's look at how he fares relative to the whole army and not just Garcia. While Ross bases are still worse than the rest of your units, the gap between Ross and the units in your army isn't as big as the gap other Trainees that join later experience. He doesn't do much damage and he's not very accurate, but there are slow enemies around his join time that don't one-round him, and enemies that he can attack safely, such as the one-range brigand that's stuck on the opposite side of a wall in Chapter 3. Ross can easily chip that guy down for a free level plus some experience. So he's a little more forgiving to train than one might expect by looking at his stats. And to help with his accuracy problem, he comes with a hatchet. which is an accurate 1-2 range weapon that makes it easy for him to chip enemies without taking a counterattack. This is great for either accurately finishing off low health enemies, or just getting chip experience, which Ross gains a respectable amount of for his first handful of levels. Despite being pretty unique, the hatchet is not a PRF weapon, so other units can take it too, but for people that want to use Ross, the hatchet is a great tool to have available and makes his training fairly painless. Plus, upcoming maps are designed with easy opportunities for Ross to grow. The first chapter after he joins has that guy stuck behind a wall for him to chuck a hatchet at, and the next chapter after that is loaded with monsters, many of whom won't one-round Ross, and some of which he can even double if he's gained a point of speed. So it's not too bad to get Ross going. It's not completely trivial, you might have to take a little bit more time, but it's not a big deal. And this is due in large part to his early join time and the hatchet. Other trainees that join later and without a special weapon struggle a bit more with this. Amelia, for example, lacks accurate 2 range, so it's harder for her to reliably finish off enemies without facing a counterattack. And Ewan joins late enough that even though he does have accurate 1-2 range, it takes many more levels for him to catch up to your army. Once Ross gets his 10 quick levels, he gets his first promotion into either fighter or pirate, and you don't even have to spend an item to make that happen. Once he hits 10, it just happens automatically before the next map. Promotions are exciting, and it's part of why trainees in FE8 are so fun. You get an immediate power boost and the chance to customize your unit by choosing what class they promote into, and trainees get to do that twice. So it feels like you have an opportunity to really shape Ross's growth, both mechanically and narratively. And his promotion options were well chosen. He can follow in his father's footsteps and become a fighter, which is narratively satisfying. Or if you don't care about that or want Ross to be a bit more of his own man and step out of his father's shadow, he offers you a unique class option in Pirate. And you won't get another Pirate until much later in the game, and that only sort of counts because that Pirate is a pre-promoted Berserker. Ross is your only chance to actually have a unit in the Pirate class. And what's cool about the Pirate option isn't just that Ross is the only way you can get one, it's that it also has unique applications in early game maps soon after Ross generally promotes. Pirates can walk on mountains and water, and there are mountains and water tiles for him to use in chapters 6, 7, and 9 in Erica Route. There's some later in the game as well, but the point is, Ross can very quickly provide you with a feature you can't get from other units in your army. And it's really not painful to get him there. Water and mountain walking with axes may not be the most incredible feature that you absolutely need in your army, but it is something unique that Ross offers in the early game, and on top of him getting his fun 10 quick levels, I feel rewarded for training him in part because of that. I also think it's a nice touch that whether you choose Pirate or Fighter, you will have Warrior as one of your final promotion options for Ross. So regardless of what you choose for your base promotion, Ross always has a chance to live out his dreams of becoming a great warrior, even if he had a rebellious pirate phase in his teenage years. There's one other cool thing about Ross that I want to touch on, and FE8's other trainees do this well too. His unit aesthetics are used to tell a great story. When we get Ross, he's a pretty small kid using a kinda oversized axe. At one range, he even sorta looks like he's struggling to swing it properly, he looks very clumsy, and this goes for Amelia and Ewan too. Their unique animations and sprite all match the story that their units tell. They're inexperienced and not used to war, but when you train them and promote them, they get the standard animations for their class, so their growth is captured not just by their stats going up, but in their sprite and animations as well. As they grow, they stop looking clumsy and start looking like regular soldiers. So Ross tells us a good story and provides us with the fun of a unit that gets to level up a bunch of times in quick succession in the early game, which is both fun because it's fun when units level up, and it's also sort of like playing a slot machine. It's pretty rare for one level up to be make or break for a unit, and it's easy to lose track of how a unit's level ups have trended over dozens of chapters when they level up slowly. But Ross usually gains his 10 levels in just a few chapters, so it's really easy to keep track of where he's blessed and where he's underperforming in the early game. There's little more exciting than Ross leveling up 3 times in a chapter and lucking into speed on all of them. Add in his unique option of going pirate, and we have a unit that stands out a lot in the early game and is fun to use. The only thing I would change about Ross is that I think he could stand to have a little bit better growths. Part of the fun of trainees that I like in other games is watching multiple stats tick up each level up, but Ross's growths aren't too exciting. In fact, they are debatably not even better than his dad's. The 10 quick level ups and extra promotion help him gain stats, but I think he should still compare more favorably to units like Dazla after training than he does. But other than that, I think Ross is a pretty model trainee, and it's part of why he's so popular. The other trainees in FE8 share many of the same traits with Ross, and it's no coincidence that they're popular too, particularly Amelia, who also has the novelty of being the first woman that could become an armor knight for Fire Emblem fans in the West. Before we get into the next trainee, I want to thank my geckos and skinks on Patreon and give a special shout out to my skinks. Marms, Shake Her Hand, Autumn Leaf, Muted Miami, The Noodle Doodler, Doopy, Stars to Art, Wingman, Upscale Furry Trash, Lonely Voxel, Cosplay Sylveon, Ike Poo, Lucy Sev, Emma, Aaron Gedden, and Red Mage Morgan. I really appreciate y'all's support. And if you want to support the channel and get shoutouts in videos like this, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the video description. Alright, back to trainees. Another trainee that I'm very fond of is Jawn in Fire Emblem Engage. Jawn has an interesting conundrum to face because one of the things that made trainees so fun to me in FE8 was their ability to be more flexible and unique compared to other units. Ross has his own unique starting class, a base class he can promote to that no one else can, and 3 options for his final promoted class instead of just 2. Even in games that do have reclassing, we haven't quite had a trainee this open yet. DSFE didn't have any trainees, Awakening doesn't have fully open reclassing, Fates has relatively open reclassing, but it's not trivial to make units into whatever you want, and while 3 Houses is flexible, it doesn't have a unit that actually feels a ton like a trainee to me. There is Cyril, but when you recruit him, he's like a minute away from being a wyvern with point-blank volley, so he never has the trainee scrub to hero arc that I get from other trainees in the series. Jawn, however, is a bona fide trainee in a game with flexible, easy-to-access reclassing. He joins at level 1, with low bases compared to your army, but he has a narrative of high potential. His paralogue is literally called Budding Talent. And he has a somewhat parallel story to Ross. His village is attacked, and his father goes out to help while telling Jawn to stay away from the violence. Of course, Jawn comes out to help anyway, and at the end joins your army to fulfill his dream of becoming a doctor. He wants to learn to fight and heal people at the same time. So the premise of his story as a unit is quickly established here. It's one of growth. And this is reflected in his personal skill Expertise, which doubles the growth rates Jawn gets from his class. For example, usually a unit that goes into General gets 30% tacked on to their personal defense growth. Jawn gets 60%. This has a few important impacts. First, it's the thing that makes Jawn a trainee. He's low level with lame bases, but his growths are good, so he promises rewards for training him. Second, it ensures that he can excel in any class. While all Engage units can take a second seal to get into most classes, they don't all have good aptitudes in all of them. Take someone like Amber, a great unit, and you could reclass him to Mage, but his poor personal base and growth in Magic make that a little bit unappealing. Jawn doubling the growths from his class ensures that if he levels up in a class, he will always have at least okay growths in the important stats for that class. If you put him in Mage, he'll have a good Magic growth. Make him a Sword Fighter and he'll have a good Speed growth, and if you want good Strength, put him in Axe Fighter. In this way, even though Jawn doesn't have access to any special classes, he's more flexible than other units because he can do well in whatever class you decide to level him up in, and that makes him feel unique. I think this is a very elegant way to make flexibility the strong point of a unit in a game where anyone can reclass to anything. My only complaint is that the skill description for Expertise could be a little bit more clear about how it works. The in-game description is, grants units enhanced stat growth when leveling up. This tells you that Jawn has good growths, but it doesn't tell you that he has appropriately good growths based on the class that you level him up in. Couple this with the fact that he comes as a staffer and frequently talks about healing and saving lives.
Hi there, I'm Jawn, a doctor in training. A doctor in training.
I wouldn't blame anyone for not understanding this skill and thinking that Jawn just has really good growths for Magic classes, and shying away from making him a physical unit. This also speaks to an issue I have with Jawn's narrative. A lot of it is about healing, saving lives, being a doctor, right down to the battle quotes. So I think there's a bit of mechanical mismatch to the story here. Maybe something about Jawn wanting to strike out and find who he wants to be would have been a better fit for his skill than the doctor-healer thing. But purely mechanically, I think Expertise works really nicely here. A trainee that is at least good in any class you put them in is cool. And a fun thing about his skill is that it tends to encourage people to use classes with more extreme growths. For example, Berserker is not a super popular class, with most people preferring Warrior. But I often see people send Jawn into Berserker, and that's because it has the highest strength growth in the game at 30%, which on Jawn doubles to 60. So classes with extreme growths in fun stats become more compelling for Jawn. Making him a Berserker to get giant strength or a General to get giant defense is amusing. And then later in the game, you can always swap him to a class with other good properties like additional weapons or more mobility, and bring with you all of the stats that Jawn gained from leveling up in his previous class. In a game where anyone can technically be anything, Jawn's additional growths help him feel a little more flexible than your average unit, and can make classes like Berserker that feel a little lame on other characters feel more exciting. Jawn also really benefits from Engage being a game where leveling up a unit isn't a big deal. To start with, he comes in a staffing class, so if you want to level him up the old-fashioned way, it may take longer than it would a combat unit, but you don't have to take any risks since staff EXP doesn't require combat, and since he's a staff class that can punch, you can still level him up by feeding him kills if you want. Realistically though, if you want to promote Jawn, you're probably going to train him with one of the emblem rings in the early game that give a lot of experience, Marth or Micaiah. Marth offers Mercurius, which doubles experience gained while using it. If you can set up Jawn a few Mercurius kills, he will be off to the races in no time. However, I prefer the Micaiah ring for Jawn. The Micaiah ring includes the Great Sacrifice ability, which heals every ally on the map and gives the user experience for each ally healed. And this can easily amount to an entire level's worth of EXP. By using any of these resources, Jawn can level up without too much trouble, but what's nice is that it doesn't really feel like you're skipping his training arc, because all of these methods still require effort on the part of the player. Sure, Mercurius gives him a lot of EXP, but he still needs to kill enemies to take advantage of it. And Micaiah may let him level up without personal risk, but you still need to set up your units to get him the most experience possible. So no matter what, you feel like you put a little effort in and are rewarded with Jawn's pretty good growth rates. Additionally, the resources Jawn wants are things other units can use, so he's providing a decision. Do you want to use an EXP emblem on your scrub to get him up to level 10, or another unit that will either do well in a specific class you have in mind, or one who's performing well already? Mercurius in particular is attached to a good combat ring, so you might even just prefer to have that on a unit with better combat. And I often like giving Alir a chapter or two with Micaiah to get them to 10 quickly. So the point is, there are options for leveling Jawn quickly, but none of them feel cost-free. You feel like you put in a little effort and spend some resources on this scrub kid to turn him into a beast, which is the story that I want out of a trainee. So for all of those reasons, I really like Jawn, and they did a good job of making him stand out in a game where I think it can be difficult for a unit to stand out. There's just one more annoying thing about Jawn to me that I have to talk about. It's not really Jawn's fault, but he should come with a second seal. You could even make it a special second seal that only Jawn can use, but I think it's frustrating that he can't immediately reclass. The fun part about Jawn is that you get to influence his growths heavily by changing his class, since his class growths are doubled. So if you want to do a physical Jawn, it's a little annoying that he's stuck in his staffing class that isn't giving you the stats you want until you finally get a second seal before Chapter 9. I find this can make Jawn a little awkward sometimes. If you want to make him a magic class, it's fine. The base magic growth on his base class is good. But if you wanted to index on strength, speed, or defense, it's not as appealing, which leaves you with two options. You can either wait until a second seal shows up to start training Jawn so that you're always getting the growth boosts that you want, or you can just train him for 10 levels in Martial Monk so that you can promote him and then reclass him to a class with more appropriate growths once the second seal shows up. I pretty much always do the latter, but if you wanted to, you could totally wait until the second seal shows up, reclass Jawn, and then get him a bunch of Micaiah Great Sacrifice levels before the rings get snapped away. If you're only using Jawn and not Anna, you could even put off Anna's paralog until after the second seal shows up to make sure Jawn gets as many possible maps of Micaiah usage after changing class. But regardless of whether you choose to level him in a class you don't want to, or wait until you can second seal him, I find this situation annoying. If I wait for the second seal, I just have this unit that I think is fun, but that I'm not deploying because I want to reclass him first. And if I train him in Martial Monk to reclass him later, I'm annoyed that I'm not really getting to take advantage of the fun part of Jawn, which is the flexible class-based growths. If he just came with a second seal, this would be fine. You wouldn't even have to increase the overall number of second seals in the game, just move one of the early second seals from the item shop to here, and the problem's solved. I even think this might make the game more fun if you weren't using Jawn, because an early second seal sounds like something I would enjoy and engage. This is ultimately a minor quibble though. Once you're able to reclass Jawn, he's a blast to use, and I think a smartly designed trainee that tries a different spin on the archetype that fits well within Engage's system. So that was 2 trainees that I really like, and that I think are designed in ways that fit nicely in the context of their game. So let's talk about one I have a few more issues with, and that's Donnel in Fire Emblem Awakening. Donnel joins in a paralogue that opens up after Chapter 3, in which his village is being attacked and you have to protect it, which seems to be a trend for these trainee units. But Donnel joins in a more interesting way than our previous 2 units. He joins you at the beginning of his paralogue, but if you want to keep him for future chapters, he must gain at least 1 level on his map. This ties nicely into the conversation that Chrom has with Donnel at the beginning of the map. Donnel tells Chrom that he can't fight, but that he wishes he could, so Chrom tells him to fight and get stronger. Should he gain his level, he becomes more confident in himself and resolves to join Chrom, become stronger, and fight against injustice. It's a great introduction for Donnel, and it helps to characterize Chrom as a figure who cares about people's character and believes that a good, motivated person can always learn and be helpful, even if they're unskilled now. It also makes for a cool side objective on the map. Donnel is very wimpy, and on the higher difficulties, all of the enemies on the map one-round him, while he deals shaky damage back. So figuring out how to get him his level is a neat challenge. The classic answer is to use the archer in the top left corner, who Donnel can trap and slowly chip away at and kill safely. Doing so gets him his 1 level, it just takes a bunch of turns. I've often heard complaints about this map for this reason, because boxing in the archer is pretty boring, but this isn't the only way to get Donnel his level. On screen is a strategy I used in my last playthrough that gets Donnel his level on turn 4. And you could make doing so even easier by giving him a forged bronze lance for more accuracy or more might. Or both. I had a fun time figuring out how to get him his level quickly, so I think it's a good side objective. Another neat thing about this side objective is that it forces players who want to recruit everyone to get a feel for what Donnel does. It would be easy for a new player to just look at Donnel's stats and say, yeah, this guy sucks, I'm gonna put him on the bench. But he's got 2 things that make him stick out. First, his skill aptitude that increases his growths, but second, that you have to level him up once. So you get to see both how annoying you're going to find training him, and you're also going to get to see him level up at least once, which is likely to be a good level up given his high growths. Some players will see the work that they need to do to get him the level and decide they don't want to bother with him, but some will see the level up and want more of them. Basically, Donnel's recruitment requirement ensures that you understand exactly what kind of unit Donnel is, and I think it's smart. Unfortunately, I do not have a ton of other praise for Donnel, because I have some issues with him as a unit in the context of Awakening. That's for a few reasons. First, while flexibility has been a common pro of trainee units, Donnel is actually less flexible than other units. He comes in a unique villager class, which you'll want to get him out of as soon as possible. It can't promote, it has bad stats, and its level 15 skill, Underdog, only gives you a bonus when you are lower level than the enemy. By the time you've given Donnel 14 levels, he's probably not going to be lower level than the enemies on the maps for too much longer. This is okay, because the point of Villager is to represent Donnel's lack of combat experience, so leveling up and it being difficult, and then reclassing to something better is just part of his narrative. It's just like Ross getting out of Journeyman and into his base class. But there's 2 problems. One is that while Ross got to escape his trainee class for free once he hits level 10, Donnel needs to use a second seal, and you do not get a lot of early second seals. They're pretty competitive. Second is that Villager is still one of the classes in Donnel's class pool, so he practically has fewer promotion options than just about every other unit in the game. While most units have between 4 and 6 promotion options, Donnel only has 3: Warrior, Hero, and Bow Knight. Granted, these are good classes, but it feels very weird to me that our trainee has less class access than the average unit. I would make it so that you train Donnel to level 10, and then he automatically gets a reclass into one of his base classes. And I would give him a 3rd base class, and it would be either Knight or Cavalier, because the second thing I find annoying about Donnel is that he can only use lances in Trainee, and then literally none of his other classes use them. When he finally gets out of Trainee, he can choose to go into Mercenary or Fighter, but either way, you're back to E-rank weapons because it was just lances in Trainee, and these classes don't use those. The issue here is that this further delays the amount of time before Donnel starts to feel better than your other units. In my last run, Donnel reclassed to Mercenary with the second seal I got in Chapter 8, which is the same time we got another mercenary, Gregor. My Donnel's stats were actually better than Gregor's, which made sense to me. He was a trainee that I had invested in. But he still ended up having worse combat because he was stuck using bronze swords while Gregor could use a steel sword, functionally giving Gregor 5 additional damage each attack compared to Donnel. Obviously, you do eventually climb out of Donnel's E-rank weapon hole, but it's annoying that you do his whole villager training arc just to move on to a weapon rank grind. I don't understand why they made Villager a lance class and then gave him no other classes that can use lances. Even if you don't want to give him another reclass option, just giving him sword or axe access in Villager would do wonders for him. You could even give him all 3 weapon types and have his starting inventory be a log, a ladle, and a tree branch, and I think that would be pretty funny. It would make it a little easier to train him since he would be able to get weapon triangle advantage, but I don't think that would be a big deal. So those are my 2 big gripes with Donnel's specific design choices, but perhaps a bigger issue with Donnel is just that being a high growth project unit isn't a super unique thing in Awakening. In Sacred Stone, someone like Ross gaining 10 extra levels and an extra promotion was fairly unique. The only other units that do that are the other 2 trainees, and if you want a 0 to hero unit, it has to be one of them, or maybe Marissa. However, this is not the case in Awakening. On the higher difficulties, every early game unit feels like this. They struggle against early enemies and often need kills set up for them, and in return they provide high growths and the joy of frequent multi-stat level ups. Donnel is a bit more extreme, he gets better level ups, and he's a little harder to train, but the concept is similar. I just find that every time I get to Donnel's chapter in Awakening, I feel like I'm just starting to get out of the phase where I was babying my units to do remotely good combat. My Crom, Sully, and Robin are finally starting to perform and grow out of the need to have things spoon-fed to them all the time. So do I really want to grab Donnel and do it all over again for dubious benefit? The reason I say dubious benefit is that while Donnel's growths are better than other units' growths are still plenty good enough to juggernaut late-game enemies. If you do Hero, Robin, or Vake, they can soul tank late-game maps and one-round tons of enemies just like Donnel can, and it doesn't feel appreciably different if I go through the effort to raise Donnel and have him do it. They all one-round most of the enemies. I'd probably like Donnel a little bit better if he joined in Chapter 1, where I'm still in that spoon-feeding kills to project units portion of my Awakening playthrough, but I'm starting to get tired of that by the time I pick up Donnel. To be clear, my issue with Donnel is not that other good units exist, but that other units provide a very similar positive experience to Donnel. Feeding a scrub unit to make them great is fun, it's why I like Trainees, but in Awakening, that's all of your early game units. Robin, Vake, Sully, and to a lesser extent Crom all have rough starts but level up fast with good growths and become gods. In FE8, there's no one quite like the Trainees. In Engage, no one is as flexible as Jawn for filling multiple classes. Donnel is a lot less unique. Because of that, it's just hard for me to get excited about him. Even beyond the early game, I get a lot of the satisfaction that I get from training Trainees in other games from training the kids in Awakening, because they sort of fill that mechanical niche that I'm looking for from Trainees, where they start a bit underleveled but are flexible and grow quickly and nicely with a bit of babying, provided that they inherited good stats and growths from their parents. I think there are a number of ways that you could make Donnel more interesting. Auto-promoting out of Villager and having Cavalier as an option would help. This would mean that he doesn't have to compete for scarce early game second seals, and it would give you an option where you get to keep your lance rank if you don't want to go back to bronze weapons. But you'd still be able to choose to go mercenary or fighter if the E-rank weapons don't bother you. This would be more similar to most units who have the option to stay in a class with the same weapon type the entire game, or reclass to a new one. Donnel could also just have better growths, especially in Villager. Once he reclasses to mercenary or fighter, his growths start looking pretty great, but in Villager, while his growths are better than other units, he's not blowing them away by as much as you might think. In key stats like strength, speed, and defense, he's only ahead of Vake by 5 to 20%, which is a difference of 1 to 2 stat points over 10 levels. This doesn't feel like enough of a reward for pushing through Donnel's Villager levels when I could just be using a unit with better bases that's already in a good class, gets to promotion sooner, and will still be comparably good in the late game. Once he does reclass, his growths get better, and then I think they're basically fine, but I would increase the class growths of Villager to make those 10 levels feel more exciting. I will also give him some credit in a few areas. First is the aesthetic. I like that he keeps his pot lid hat for the entire game. It adds a little flair and uniqueness to him. Second, I think he's a pretty fun parent because he gets to potentially pass aptitude down to his kid. So functionally, you can pair him off with someone to create another trainee later, but in a less bad join situation. Another funny quirk of Donnel as a parent is that for whatever reason, Villager and Fighter are male-only classes. So if he has a daughter, he passes down Pegasus Knight and Troubadour to them instead. So no matter what, Donnel always gives his kids good classes. Male children get Hero and Warrior, female children get Pegasus Knight and Hero. What's not to like? Third, I think his 100% luck growth is kinda fun. Getting a high luck stat super early means that he can take advantage of Arms Thrift from Mercenary pretty well. Arms Thrift is a skill that makes it so that when you attack, you have a luck times 2% chance to not use up any durability on your weapon. And since Donnel's luck goes up very fast, I'm comfortable forging him a stupidly expensive weapon a little earlier than I am when I use Mercenary on units with worse luck. This isn't a huge deal. I think Arms Thrift can actually be a little overrated, but I like when units have little quirks like this that can make them more interesting to use and stand out amongst other options. It being fun to forge weapons for Donnel is a plus for him. Despite my frustrations with some of Donnel's design choices, I still think he's a decently fun unit to use, and it's no coincidence that he, like other trainees, is pretty popular. I think this speaks to how strong the allure of a trainee is. It's just fun taking these little scrub units and watching them blossom into major parts of your army. Still, can we please have Donnel not go back to E-rank weapons when he gets out of Villager? I'm begging you, Insys. So those were the trainees I wanted to go into detail about, but I have two quick honorable mentions from games that I don't play a ton of, but that do interesting things with their trainees. The first is Mozu, specifically in Fate's Conquest. Mozu joins in a seemingly similar situation to Donnel, but she has a few things going for her that set her apart. A big one is that she doesn't need to get 10 levels to reclass. Instead, she can get out of Villager immediately by using a Heart Seal. This does remove a little bit of the narrative of training her in a scrub class, but man, Villager is just not a fun class to level in. Instead, we can immediately slide Mozu into Archer. This is neat because you don't have another Archer in Conquest, so it's a unique class that Mozu can provide both for herself and for units that support her. The other cool thing about Archer access is that Mozu shows up right before Chapter 10, which has several Pegasus Knights that she can provide effective damage against without facing a counterattack. She still feels like a trainee. Her stats won't be incredible and you need to keep her from getting hit, but she is able to contribute at least a little bit as she grows, and bows provide her a way to get combat in safely and accurately versus Donnel in Awakening, who for his first few levels will often be risking death if he misses against a one-range enemy. So Mozu is less painful to train and provides some immediate contributions with a unique class. Cool. The other unit I wanted to touch on is Naren in Tearing Saga. Early in Tearing Saga, you get to pick one of 4 units to join your army. The most interesting to me were the Bishop, who is your first offensive magic user if you pick him, and Naren, who is sort of a scrub, but you are advised that he could be a diamond in the rough. His growths aren't anything spectacular, but he does come with the elite skill that lets him gain experience faster. However, if you pay attention to your units, there is something you'll notice about Naren compared to your other Cavaliers. He promotes into a slightly different class than them, a Gold Paladin. And when he does, my god, the stat bonus on the promotion is ridiculous. He will promote and immediately be one of the strongest members of your army. I thought this was an interesting way to do a trainee because it's a little unusual. He's a unit where, if you don't pay attention to the promotion, seems kind of bad. Sure, you could invest in him and his EXP gain is good, he levels a lot, but the level gains are never that exciting. It's really all about that promotion bonus and the skills that he learns as he levels up. I think this could be a good way to do trainees or villagers whose narrative revolves around achieving some specific class goal. Take Ross. It might be cool if he had a special warrior class with awesome promotion gains, because achieving his goal of becoming a warrior is the climax of his arc as a character. Probably not an appropriate choice for every character, especially if you don't want to pigeonhole a character into a specific class, but for characters with a story that revolves around class identity, I think it's fun. Alright, that's all the trainees I wanted to talk about today, so thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. I think trainees are among the most fun units to use in Fire Emblem, and it's not surprising to me that they're popular. The formula of weak unit that grows strong with effort, often attached to a charming character, is a recipe for success. It's often both narratively satisfying and feels like you're being rewarded for effort that you put into the game. But who's your favorite trainee? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked the video, consider leaving a like or subscribe so that you never miss an upload. If you want to chat about Fire Emblem more, hop in the community Discord that you'll find linked in the video description. Either way, thank you for hanging out, and I hope you have a lovely week.